Perfect. So hello everyone and welcome. I'm Kirsten Winkler of kirstenwinkler.com, and today I got questions for Greg Detre, one of the co-founders of Memrise.com. Welcome, Greg.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So today we want to talk a little bit about flashcard learning, also feature or product. But before, let's say in a nutshell, for all those who may not yet know Memrise, in a nutshell, what do you do?
Memrise is a way to really turbocharge the rate at which you learn and how much you remember. I'm a neuroscientist, and my partner Ed Cook is one of the top competitive memorizers and grandmasters of memory in the world, and we're trying to take everything we know about the art and science of memory to help you learn much, much more effectively.
Mm-hmm. Then your own take on that, or let's say the space in general. Why do you think that flashcard learning has become so incredibly popular that nowadays I see more and more startups taking on that niche and position themselves one or the other way? But generally spoken, why is it such an interesting niche?
Well, it's a really good question, because in a world with Google and smartphones, you can in principle find the answer to any question you might have. But there are still many cases where having knowledge inside your head is really, really important. If you're trying to hold a conversation with a stranger or have a business meeting, then you need to internalize the vocabulary and language. If you want to make a sales pitch, you need to know your sales figures. If you're going to be a wine waiter or a lawyer or a doctor or any one of a million domains where knowledge is important, you have to have things inside your head. And flashcards are amongst the most effective ways to improve that learning experience.
As you have this incredible scientific background, can you tell me a little bit more what's actually going on in our brains when you say that flashcards are a mean to really learn so effectively? What are the procedures and what's really happening?
Good. Well, so flashcards are a great way to learn because they force you to dredge up a memory. They force you to recollect it. And that act of recalling the memory is one of the best ways of learning it. So being tested actually cements your knowledge. Whereas if you just stare at a page of a textbook, if you just look at the answer, because you're not actively recalling, you're really, really not going to be strengthening your memories. So flashcards are great because they're continually testing you. And so they're one of the three things that we've really emphasized to try and maximize the amount that you retain. But I should say what's interesting, and this is a lot of the work that came out of the science of memory in the last decade or so, and a lot of the focus of my PhD was that you have to be a bit careful because there's a growing body of evidence to suggest that being tested and getting the answer right is a good thing.
Okay.
But if you get the answer wrong, potentially that can be bad for your memories. And in fact, if you're doing multiple choice and you choose the wrong answer, there's a real risk that you'll lay down a false memory, a memory for the answer that you picked rather than the right answer.
Oh, I
So
see.
one of the things that we're trying to do is to test you, to build a model of how likely we think you are to remember something, to try and make sure that you do, and so strengthen your memory. But if we think that you aren't going to remember it, we try and avoid the case where you could have give a wrong answer or have a kind of tip of the tongue moment and potentially damage your memories. So there's more to it than just testing. There's a kind of there's an art to it, I think.
And just out of curiosity, how do you want to achieve that?
Well, that's a big question.
Yeah.
Here's my best attempt to make it simple.
Mm-hmm.
Going back about 150 years, psychologists have had an idea of the rate at which we forget. And in fact, the longer
Right.
you've known something, the
Mm-hmm.
slower you forget it. And if you know anything about spaced repetition, this will be very familiar. And so we build in a lot of that insight into our scheduling algorithms for when to remind you, when to test you, when to add you to work.
Mm-hmm.
And so based on our scheduling algorithm, I can estimate how well you're likely to know something, how quickly you'll have forgotten it. And so that enables us to time the tests so that we test you at the moment when we think you still remember it, but you're about to forget it.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
That's pretty impressive. You mentioned before that Memrise.com, you're currently still in beta, but
Yeah.
all of what you have just told us is basically already built in the product as we can try or use it today.
Yeah, so we have a kind of rich plan for how we want to really, really tweak these to maximize the effect. We have the first version of the algorithm working already, and we're continually tweaking it. And I think at this point, I feel pretty confident saying that it works well, and I'm even more confident that it's going to work really well as we kind of tweak it over the next few months. But yes, pretty much everything I described is implemented already.
And can you share some, let's say, not so confidential data of your test classes or students? How did they improve their memory and their learning with the help of Memrise so far?
Well, so I'm a scientist, and so I take the controlled experiment very, very seriously. And I should be very honest and say we haven't yet run the kind of controlled experiment that I would trust as a scientist. So everything I'm going to say is anecdotal, but I don't think it's misleading. There are three things we're doing to improve the rate at which you learn. I talked a little bit about testing and how important. I talked a little bit about how we schedule the reminders to maximize the effect of each. And then the final thing is we use mnemonics in a bunch of ways to try and make those memories as vivid and sticky as possible. Now, each one of those three aspects, is worth a factor of 2 to 3 boost in how well you remember.
Why?
And so I don't think that we're quite at the point where we're boosting your memory by a factor of 10, but that's how. I would say relative to staring at the textbook, I'd say Memrise is many times more effective, and I'm not yet ready to put a number on exactly how much.
And having this rare opportunity to really talking to a scientist, tell me a little bit about those research about the neuro connections. How do they actually work, and what would you say? Do we at present day still know relatively little how our brain actually works and we make more assumptions, or is there really already research that shows, okay, it's going in this and that direction and it's relatively precise, so we know where it's leading us?
Well, those are good questions. I would say that we know a fair amount about the different memory systems in the brain. And there are multiple memory systems and the complementary role that they play to one another. So, for instance, you have the hippocampal memory system that's great at kind of taking a snapshot of the world almost immediately. And then during sleep, it plays those snapshots back to your longer term, slower learning cortical memory. And that that cortical memory is what consolidates things that will last for years and years at a time. And it kind of aggregates over multiple snapshots to see what's common, what's general, what's abstractly, regular in our world. And there are, oh, excuse me.
No problem at all.
So I think we know a fair amount about those different memory systems, and there's more than just those two. In terms of what we, and I mean, I can talk more about that, and the different kinds of memory systems. But in terms of what we don't know, well, there's lots we don't know. We're starting to get better at understanding how memories are represented at a low level in the brain, how you can take, billions and billions of neurons and connections between them, and out of that somehow represent things that we think of in the real world, like the thoughts. And there are great models, but I wouldn't say that we have quite got it right yet, and that there's a lot more work to do. And I would say, I think there are sort of really interesting educational theorists who have ideas about why different people learn better than others, why different techniques work for different people. And this is not my area, but my sense is that we still have more to learn about that as well.
Okay, good. Then let's switch a little bit more to the business point of view. So I see quite a few companies actually in that space, everybody with their, let's say, specific approach, you coming more from the scientific background. Then I see also a lot going on in the first communities, for example, adding user-generated flashcards now. And in all of that, so note-taking, particularly flashcard learning, do you think your take on that, is it enough to build a company, or is it more that it'll go in the direction that more and more people will add it as a feature and maybe concentrate more on their community, but still see it as important that they don't want to miss on that opportunity?
Well, so there's a few questions there. Ed and I have been talking about how we could take our best insights, him from the competitive memory field and me from the science of memory, and really apply those in the mainstream, because for the most part, those ideas haven't really filtered down to the way that everybody learns. And they should, because they definitely work. And flashcards make a great place to start, and we focused on vocabulary learning because vocabulary learning is at the center of all language learning. It's where you can get the most bang for your buck, and your vocabulary size is highly predictive of your overall linguistic competence. The brain's great at taking the vocabulary it knows and using that to structure its learning about syntax around that. So it makes sense to start with vocabulary learning for us. And we know that we can make a huge difference to a problem that people really struggle with. Growing outwards, there's lots of ways that one can develop into different domains. And potentially there are ways to build richer and more structured memories on top of simple flashcards. And that's our dream. I think, to take an example, right, I think we could build a system to help medical students study for their exams that could potentially save them weeks of their lives and ensure that they're more likely to have the kind of knowledge that they really need at their fingertips for the rest of their careers. But that is a complex domain that I wouldn't want to blunder into without feeling more confident.
Right.
And without, and having domain experts and things like that. So we're starting with a domain where we know we can make a difference right off the bat.
Yeah. Great. So that actually leads to the next question on where do you see or how do you see Memrise develop over the, let's say, next couple of months? Where do you want to be in, yeah, maybe let's say 6 months or towards the end of 2011?
Wow, so there's so many things that I'm excited that we have in the development pipeline that aren't quite ready. Right now, it's possible for anyone to add a language that they're trying to learn, add their own words, add their own mnemonics, and craft their own learning experience.
Mm-hmm.
And that's great, but I know how we can improve that to make it easier, to make it faster for people. So that's really important. There's a lot that's interestingly challenging about creating high-quality user-generated content because we care very much that our content is right and helpful. And so structuring the community in a way that we are able to improve that quality and to make sure that we have a kind of rich set of knowledge around just the basic words, the basic flashcards that help contextualize and enrich all of the things that you're trying to learn. I think we have made a conscious decision to focus on flashcards for the moment because there are lots of companies who are purporting to teach you a language, say, from scratch completely through software. And I know that we can do a great job with vocabulary, so we're going to start there. I think it's a really hard thing to go beyond that. And so though we have ideas and there are lots of people doing really interesting things, but we've kind of consciously scoped it.
Awesome. And I think that's actually a good take to start with one thing and to do it really well and then see what the opportunities beyond that were for Memrise. So, Greg, for people interested in knowing more about Memrise as a product or a service or getting in touch with you, what would you say? I mean, of course, visiting the website, and then are there further possibilities? Let's mention your blog maybe and your activity in social media.
Great. Well, yeah, we'd love to see you on our blog, blog.memrise.com, or send us an email, info@memrise.com. Ed, my partner, writes regularly on providing insights and ideas for how people can apply these kind of memory techniques to their daily lives. And I think we'd love to hear from people with ideas or questions that we can use to try and gather more information. Because there is a huge amount of stuff on this out on the internet, but sometimes it's hard to know how to apply it to things that matter to you personally. And we'd love to do that.
True. So thank you so much for this very interesting and insightful first questions. It was really great, and yeah, I think we got a nice opportunity knowing Memrise better and also the concepts behind.
Well, thank you very much for having me.